The stagecoach rattled into St. Elmo, Colorado on a blistering afternoon in June of 1883, carrying not just one woman but two, and Douglas Lancaster felt his stomach drop somewhere near his dusty boots as he watched them descend together onto the wooden platform. He had written to Miss Victoria Zimmerman explaining his situation with painful honesty. He was a rancher with 3,000 acres of decent grazing land, a modest cabin that needed a woman's touch, and a loneliness that had settled into his bones after 6 years of working the land alone. She had written back with equal honesty about her circumstances in Philadelphia, working 14-hour days in a textile mill after her father's death, supporting herself, and sending what little remained to help her younger sister. Not once had she mentioned her mother. Douglas shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his heart hammering against his ribs. The younger woman, Victoria he presumed, stood maybe 5 feet and 4 inches tall, with dark brown hair pulled back in a practical bun beneath a modest traveling hat. Her dress was faded blue calico, clean but showing its age in the careful patches near the hem. She had a determined set to her jaw and eyes that sparkled with intelligence, despite the obvious exhaustion from her journey. The older woman beside her clutched Victoria's arm with one hand and a worn carpetbag with the other, her hair completely silver beneath a black bonnet, her frame thin and trembling slightly from what appeared to be both age and nerves. "Mr. Lancaster." Victoria's voice carried across the dusty street, clear and steady despite what must have been considerable anxiety. "Yes, madam. Miss Zimmerman, I presume." Douglas stepped forward, removing his hat in what he hoped was a gentlemanly gesture despite the sweat staining the band and the dust coating his work clothes. He had tried to clean up, but the ranch demanded his attention right up until the moment he had to ride into town. "Please call me Victoria." She managed a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "This is my mother, Eleanor Zimmerman." The silence stretched between them for a long moment. Douglas could see the fear flickering behind Victoria's brave expression, the way her hand tightened protectively around her mother's arm. He thought of the letters they had exchanged, the careful way she had described her life, the hope that had threaded through her words. He thought of his own loneliness, the empty cabin that echoed with his footsteps, the supper fires that felt pointless when cooking only for himself. "Madam," he said, addressing Eleanor directly and watching her faded blue eyes meet his with surprise. "It is an honor to meet you both. I apologize that my wagon is not as comfortable as I would like for the ride to the ranch, but I have blankets to cushion the seat." Victoria's eyes went suspiciously bright. "You mean you do not mind? About my mother, mind?" "Miss Victoria, a woman who cares for her mother is exactly the kind of woman I hoped would answer my advertisement." Douglas meant every word, though his mind was already racing ahead to the practicalities. His cabin had one main room with his bed in the corner behind a curtain he had rigged up. There was a small loft where he stored supplies. It would not do, not at all, not for 3 people with any sense of propriety. Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice soft and cultured despite her obvious poor health. "Mr. Lancaster, I must explain. I am not well. I do not want to be a burden to you both. If there is somewhere in town I might find employment, perhaps as a seamstress or taking in washing, I could manage on my own." "Absolutely not." The words came out more forcefully than Douglas intended, and he softened his tone. "I apologize, madam, but no. You have traveled across this country with your daughter. You are family now, or will be once Victoria and I are wed, and family does not abandon family." He saw tears spill down Victoria's cheeks then, though she brushed them away quickly. "I did not know how to tell you in the letters. Every time I started, the words seemed impossible. I could not leave her behind, but I knew no man would want the burden of an ailing mother-in-law before he even had a wife. Douglas offered his arm to Eleanor, noting how light she felt even through the fabric of her sleeve, how her breathing seemed labored. "Let me help you to the wagon. We have about an hour's drive to the ranch, and I imagine you are both exhausted. We will get you settled, and then I have some building to do." "Building?" Victoria fell into step beside them, managing her own bag and one of her mother's. "A room. Cannot have us all living in one space. It would not be proper, and your mother needs her rest and privacy." Douglas helped Eleanor up onto the wagon seat, impressed by her determination to manage despite her obvious weakness. Victoria climbed up beside her mother, leaving Douglas to take the reins. As he guided the horses out of St. Elmo and onto the rough trail leading to his ranch, he could feel Victoria's eyes on him, studying him as he had studied her. He wondered what she saw. He was 30 years old, weathered from years of sun and wind, his hands calloused and scarred from the endless work of maintaining a ranch. His hair was dark brown, kept short for practicality, and he knew his face would never win any prizes for handsomeness with its crooked nose from a horse kick 3 years back, and the scar through his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. "How long have you been ranching, Mr. Lancaster?" Victoria asked, and he appreciated that she was trying to fill the awkward silence. "Please call me Douglas, or just Doug if you prefer. I have had the land for 6 years now. Bought it from a man who was heading further west to California. He had started the cabin and put up some fencing, ran about 200 head of cattle. I have built it up to around 500 now, plus horses. It is not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it is mine, and it turns a profit most years. What happens in the years it does not turn a profit?" Eleanor's question was shrewd, and Douglas found himself respecting her immediately. "I break even or come close enough. I keep a reserve fund, madam. My father taught me that much before he passed. Never spend everything you make, because nature does not care about your bills when she sends drought or blizzard or disease." They talked of practical things as the wagon bounced along the rutted trail. Douglas pointed out landmarks, the creek that ran along his northern property line, the stand of aspens where he sometimes saw deer in the early morning. Victoria asked intelligent questions about the ranch operations, about the seasonal work, about his plans for expansion. Eleanor remained mostly quiet, but he could see her taking everything in with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The cabin came into view as they crested a small rise, and Douglas tried to see it through their eyes. It was solidly built of logs he had cut and hauled himself, with a stone chimney on one end and a covered porch across the front. The roof was sound, the windows small but intact. A barn stood about 50 yards away, large enough for a dozen horses and storage for hay and equipment. A chicken coop, a smokehouse, and a small forge completed the main buildings. Fencing stretched out in all directions, and cattle dotted the grasslands beyond. "It is beautiful," Victoria said softly, and Douglas felt a warmth spread through his chest at the genuine wonder in her voice. "It is home, or I hope it will be your home too." He pulled the wagon up to the porch and helped both women down. Eleanor was trembling with fatigue, and Victoria looked ready to drop despite her attempts to appear strong. Inside, the cabin was as clean as he could make it, though he knew it still bore the stamp of a bachelor's residence. The main room held a table with 4 mismatched chairs, a cook stove, shelves with supplies and dishes, and a few pegs on the wall for hanging coats and hats. His bed stood in the corner behind the curtain, made up with clean if worn quilts. A ladder led to the loft above. "Mama needs to rest," Victoria said, her voice tight with concern as Eleanor swayed slightly. "Of course. Please use my bed. I will be outside working anyway. Douglas helped guide Eleanor to the bed, noting how Victoria fussed over her mother, removing her bonnet and shoes, tucking the quilts around her despite the warmth of the day. When Victoria emerged from behind the curtain, her eyes were red-rimmed but her chin was high. I need to tell you the truth. My mother has consumption. The doctors in Philadelphia said she had perhaps a year, maybe less. The air here in the mountains, they said it might help. It was part of why I answered your advertisement. I know that makes me mercenary and dishonest, and if you want to send us back, I will understand. I have a little money saved. It might be enough for tickets back east, or perhaps we could stay in town. Douglas crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his, feeling how cold they were despite the summer heat. Listen to me, Victoria. You did what you had to do to save your mother's life. There is no shame in that. There is nothing mercenary about love. We will get married as planned. We will build your mother a proper room so she can rest in peace and privacy, and we will do everything in our power to help her get well. Is that understood? But you do not even know me. We have exchanged letters, but that is all. What if we do not suit? What if you find you cannot bear the sight of me, or I you? Then we will deal with that when and if it happens. But Victoria, I have been alone for 6 years. I have spent countless nights sitting at that table eating supper by myself, talking to my horse because there was no one else to hear about my day. I have missed so many things about having a family, about sharing a life with someone. You came all this way in good faith. The least I can do is meet you with the same good faith. She studied his face for a long moment, and then she smiled, a real smile this time that transformed her entire face. He could see the beauty that hard work and worry had hidden, the sparkle in her green eyes, the dimple in her left cheek. Thank you, Douglas. I promise I will be a good wife. I can cook and clean and sew. I managed our household after my father died, and I will work hard here. I will earn my place. I do not doubt it, but right now I need you to do something for me. Anything. Rest. You look dead on your feet, and your mother is going to need you in the hours ahead. Take the loft. There are blankets up there. Sleep for a few hours while I start on the addition. You are really going to build a room, today, right now. I said I would, did I not? A man is only as good as his word, Victoria. Besides, I cannot have us getting married with your mother 20 feet away behind a flimsy curtain. She deserves privacy, and so do we. Victoria blushed prettily at that, and Douglas felt something shift in his chest. Maybe this could work. Maybe this strange beginning could become something real. After Victoria climbed to the loft, moving quietly so as not to disturb her mother, Douglas changed into his work clothes and headed to the barn. He had lumber, thank God, left over from building a new section of fence in the spring. He had nails and tools and experience. What he did not have was time, but he would make do. The sun would not set until after 8 o'clock this time of year, and he could work by lantern light if needed. He marked out the addition on the north side of the cabin, a room about 12 feet by 12 feet, large enough for a decent bed, a dresser, maybe a chair by the window for sitting and sewing. He would frame it tonight, get the walls up, do a temporary roof. Tomorrow he could finish it properly. It would not be fancy, but it would be private and clean and warm. The sound of hammer on wood rang out across the ranch as Douglas worked with focused intensity. He dug post holes, set the frame, began nailing up wall boards. The physical labor felt good after the nervous energy of meeting Victoria and Eleanor. His mind worked as his hands did, turning over the sudden change in his circumstances. He had been lonely, yes, but he had also grown accustomed to his solitude. Now suddenly he would have not just a wife but a mother-in-law, an ailing one at that. He would have responsibilities beyond the ranch, people depending on him for more than just wages. The weight of it should have felt crushing, but instead it felt right, like a missing piece sliding into place. The sun was beginning to set when he heard the cabin door open. Victoria emerged carrying a cup of water and what looked like some jerky and bread from his supplies. She had removed her traveling jacket and pushed up her sleeves, and he could see the lean strength in her forearms, the capable way she moved. "You should eat something," she said, approaching him with a determined stride. "You have been working for hours without pause." Douglas accepted the food gratefully, suddenly aware of his hunger. "Thank you. How is your mother?" Sleeping still. The journey took a great deal out of her. Victoria looked at the half-built room, at the frame taking shape against the cabin wall. "I cannot believe you are really doing this." "Did you think I was lying?" "No. I just thought perhaps you meant you would start planning it, or hire someone, or do it next week. Not that you would begin building it immediately while we slept." She reached out and touched one of the supporting posts, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "My father was a clerk, Mr. Lancaster. Douglas. He worked with numbers and ledgers. We lived in a boarding house. I have never known anyone who could just decide to build something and then do it with their own hands. Out here, you learn to do everything yourself or it does not get done. Cannot wait for someone else when a fence is down and cattle are wandering, or when a storm is coming and the roof needs patching." He finished the jerky and bread quickly. "I appreciate the food. There is more in the pantry if you want to make yourself and your mother something more substantial. I was thinking I might cook supper for all of us if you would not mind. I saw you have supplies, eggs from the chickens, some bacon, potatoes. I could make something decent. Victoria, you just arrived after days of travel. You do not need to start working immediately." "I want to. I need to feel useful, Douglas. I need to start making this a home, our home. Please let me do this." He nodded, understanding that need in his bones. "All right. But wake me if your mother needs anything, or if you need anything. I will keep working as long as the light holds." She left him to his work, and soon he could smell cooking food wafting from the cabin. His stomach growled in response, despite the jerky he had just eaten. Bachelor cooking had meant a lot of beans and salt pork, simple things that required little effort. The smell of bacon frying and potatoes sizzling was enough to make his mouth water. Douglas worked until full dark, getting 3 walls completely up and starting on the 4th. By lantern light, he managed to get the wall finished and began on the temporary roof. It would not be pretty, just some boards and canvas, but it would keep rain out until he could do proper shingles. When he finally quit for the night, exhausted and satisfied, Victoria was sitting on the porch steps waiting for him. She had changed into a simple work dress and tied her hair back with a ribbon. She looked younger somehow, less worn down. "Supper is keeping warm on the stove." Mama ate a little and fell back asleep. "How is the room coming?" "Walls are up. Temporary roof is on. Tomorrow I will finish it properly, put in a real roof, hang a door, install a window. Day after that we can move a bed in." "Where will you sleep tonight?" "The barn is fine. I have done it before when the cabin got too hot in summer." "That does not seem right. This is your home. And it is your home now too. I will not have you and your mother uncomfortable. The barn is clean and quiet. Honestly, after the work today, I could sleep standing up." They ate together at the rough table, and Douglas could not remember when food had tasted so good. Victoria had worked magic with his simple supplies, making a meal that filled his belly and warmed something deeper. She told him about her journey west, about the trains and stages, about her worry for her mother at every jostling mile. "Tell me about your family," she said as they finished eating. "You mentioned your father taught you to save money, but you have not spoken much of them." "Not much to tell. My father died when I was 20, took a fever and was gone within a week. My mother passed when I was just a boy, maybe 8 years old. Cholera. My father never remarried, just threw himself into his work. He was a carpenter back in Kansas, taught me the trade from the time I could hold a hammer. Is that why you knew how to build the room so quickly? Partly, though I have learned a lot since coming out here. You have to be a carpenter, a blacksmith, a veterinarian, a doctor, and 10 other things all at once when you are running a ranch. He studied her face in the lamplight. What about your family? You mentioned a younger sister in your letters. Victoria's expression grew sad. Mary. She is 16 now, still in Philadelphia. She is living with our aunt and working in the same textile mill I did. I send her money when I can. I hope perhaps one day she can come west too, make a better life. Why did she not come with you and your mother? My aunt would not hear of it. Said Mary owed her for the charity of taking her in. It is not really charity, of course. Mary pays rent from her wages, but our aunt likes having the income and the help. Victoria's hands clenched into fists on the table. When I have money, I am going to send for her. Bring her here where she can have a real chance. When you have money, or when we have money? Douglas asked quietly. She looked up at him, startled. Victoria, when we marry, what is mine becomes yours, and what is yours becomes mine. That is how marriage works. If you want to send for your sister, we will send for your sister. This ranch can support another person, especially if she is willing to work. You would do that. Take in another of my family. Family is important. It is what makes the hard times bearable and the good times meaningful. I meant what I said earlier. We are in this together now. Victoria reached across the table and took his hand, her grip firm despite the delicacy of her fingers. I will be a good wife to you, Douglas. I promise you that. I will work hard. I will keep your home. I will be a partner to you in building this ranch. I believe you, and I promise to be a good husband. I cannot promise we will never argue or have hard times, but I can promise I will always treat you with respect and honesty. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Victoria stood to clear the dishes. Douglas helped her, learning where she had organized things in the kitchen, noting the small changes she had already made to make the space more efficient. They worked well together, he realized, moving around each other without awkwardness. When should we marry? Victoria asked as she dried the last plate. Well, there is a circuit preacher who comes through St. Elmo about once a month. He was here 2 weeks ago, so it will be another 2 weeks before he comes around again. Unless you want to wait longer, have time to be sure. No, 2 weeks seems right. It will give us time to get the room finished, get Mama settled properly. Time for us to get to know each other a bit better before we stand before God and make our vows. 2 weeks it is then. Douglas picked up his hat from the peg by the door. I will head to the barn. Leave the door unbarred in case your mother needs anything in the night. I will be up early to do morning chores, but you sleep as late as you need. Douglas, Victoria called as he reached the door. Yes, thank you for everything, for not sending us away, for building the room, for being kind. I know this is not what you expected when you posted that advertisement. Maybe not, but I have learned that the unexpected is not always a bad thing. Sleep well, Victoria. He crossed the dark yard to the barn, his body aching from the hard work but his mind strangely at peace. The barn smelled of hay and horses, familiar and comforting. He made a bed in the loft, the same place he had slept his first few nights on the ranch before the cabin was fully habitable. Through the open loft door he could see the cabin, warm lamplight glowing through the windows. He had a family now, or would have in 2 weeks. The thought was both terrifying and wonderful. He fell asleep planning the next day's work, mentally listing everything that needed to be done to finish Eleanor's room and keep the ranch running smoothly. Douglas woke before dawn, as was his habit, and went about his morning chores. He fed the horses, collected eggs from the chickens, milked the cow he kept for fresh milk and butter. The sun was just touching the horizon when he headed back to the cabin with his arms full of supplies. Victoria was already awake, dressed in her work dress with an apron tied around her waist. She had coffee brewing and was mixing up what looked like biscuit dough. "Good morning. I hope I did not use too much of your flour. Use whatever you need. That is what it is there for." He set down the eggs and milk. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months, actually. It is so quiet here. In the city there is always noise, people, carts in the street. Here I could hear crickets and wind and nothing else. It was lovely." "How is your mother this morning?" "Still sleeping. I think the journey really exhausted her. I will let her rest as long as she can." They worked together to make breakfast, and Douglas found himself enjoying the simple domesticity of it. He was not used to having someone to talk to in the morning, to share the small observations about the day ahead. Victoria asked about his plans, offered to help where she could, and generally made herself indispensable within the span of a single morning. After breakfast, Douglas returned to work on Eleanor's room. He tore off the temporary roof and began building a proper one, angling it to match the cabin's main roof and covering it with shingles. He built a door frame and hung the door he had prepared, installing a simple latch that could be secured from inside for privacy. He cut an opening for a window and installed the glass, precious and expensive but necessary for light and air. Victoria appeared mid-morning with water and fresh baked bread. "Can I help? I'm not skilled with carpentry, but I can hand you tools or hold things steady or whatever you need." "Actually, yes. If you could steady this trim board while I nail it, that would speed things up considerably." They worked together through the morning, and Douglas taught her the basics of what he was doing. She learned quickly, anticipating what he would need next, asking intelligent questions about why he did things a certain way. The room took shape around them, transforming from a rough shell into something comfortable. "I am going to build a bed frame this afternoon," he said as they broke for lunch. "I have a decent mattress in the loft I have been saving. Not new, but clean and in good condition. We can stuff it with fresh straw tonight, and it will be comfortable. You just happen to have an extra mattress. I bought it in town last year thinking I would eventually need it for the bunkhouse when I could afford to hire hands. Never got around to building the bunkhouse, so it has just been sitting there." He did not mention that he had also entertained thoughts of eventually having children, of needing another bed. That seemed presumptuous now. Eleanor emerged from the cabin after lunch, moving slowly but with more color in her cheeks than she had shown yesterday. Douglas jumped down from the roof where he had been finishing the shingles and removed his hat in respect. "Mr. Lancaster, I must see what you have built." Her voice was stronger today, and Douglas felt cautiously optimistic. He helped her walk around the addition, showing her where the door would open, where the window would let in morning light. "It is not fancy, madam, but it will be private and warm. I am going to build you a bed frame this afternoon, and we will get you properly settled tonight. This is more than fancy, Mr. Lancaster. This is kindness." Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears. "I have been such a burden to my daughter, and I feared I would be the same to you. But you have done this for me, a woman you do not even know, and I cannot express what it means. You are not a burden, madam. You are Victoria's mother, which makes you family. Family takes care of each other. That is just how it is." Eleanor reached out and patted his cheek with her thin hand. "You are a good man, Douglas Lancaster. My daughter is very fortunate." Over the next few days, Douglas finished Eleanor's room completely. He built a sturdy bed frame, installed shelves on one wall for her belongings, and even fashioned a small table that could sit beside the bed for a lamp and water glass. Victoria sewed curtains from fabric she found in his supplies, simple but cheerful calico that matched her mother's temperament. When they finally moved Eleanor in, Douglas could see the relief on Victoria's face. Her mother would have privacy and dignity, a place to rest without feeling she was intruding on anyone else's space. Eleanor settled into her new room like a bird into a nest, arranging her few belongings with obvious pleasure. The wedding was set for Saturday, 2 weeks after Victoria's arrival. The circuit preacher, Reverend Thomas Harper, arrived in St. Elmo that morning, and Douglas drove Victoria into town in the wagon. Eleanor was not strong enough for the journey, so she stayed at the ranch under the care of Douglas's nearest neighbor, a widow named Martha Green who lived about 3 miles south. Douglas had put on his best clothes, a dark suit he kept for weddings and funerals, and Victoria wore a dress she had been working on all week, pale green cotton that brought out her eyes. She had fashioned a small bouquet from wildflowers picked that morning, purple columbines and yellow buttercups. "Are you nervous?" Douglas asked as they drove toward town. "Terrified," Victoria admitted. "Not about marrying you, but about everything changing. What if I am not a good enough wife? What if I disappoint you? What if I disappoint you? I am set in my ways, Victoria. I have been alone for a long time. I might not be easy to live with. Then we will both have to be patient with each other and learn as we go." She smiled at him, and he felt his nervousness settle somewhat. The wedding was simple, held in the small church at the edge of St. Elmo. There were witnesses, townsfolk who Douglas knew casually from his business dealings. The Reverend kept the ceremony brief but meaningful, and when Douglas slipped the simple gold band he had bought onto Victoria's finger, he meant every word of the vows he had just spoken. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Harper said with a smile. Douglas had been thinking about this moment, wondering if it would be awkward, if Victoria would be uncomfortable. But when he leaned in and pressed his lips gently to hers, it felt natural and right. The kiss was chaste, appropriate for a church full of people, but it held promise for the future. Victoria was smiling when they broke apart, her cheeks flushed prettily. "Hello, husband," she whispered. "Hello, wife," he whispered back, and felt something warm bloom in his chest. They celebrated with a simple meal at the town's boarding house, and several of the locals who knew Douglas came by to offer congratulations. The general store owner's wife pulled Victoria aside and talked with her for several minutes, and Douglas watched his bride handle the social interaction with grace, despite her obvious exhaustion. On the drive back to the ranch, Victoria sat close beside him on the wagon seat, and Douglas found himself hyper-aware of her presence. His wife. The word still felt strange in his mind, but less strange than it had that morning. "Eleanor seemed better this morning," he said, needing to fill the silence. "She did. Martha said the mountain air is helping already. She coughs less at night, and she ate a full breakfast this morning." Victoria's voice was cautiously hopeful. Maybe the doctors were right. Maybe the air here will give her more time. We will do everything we can to make sure it does. They arrived back at the ranch as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Martha was sitting on the porch, and she stood as they pulled up. "Congratulations to you both. Eleanor is resting comfortably. She had a good day, ate well, even sat outside for a bit this afternoon enjoying the sunshine. Thank you for staying with her, Martha. Can I offer you supper before you head home?" "No, thank you, Douglas. My own chores are waiting." "But Victoria, you must come visit soon. It will be nice to have another woman nearby." Martha climbed into her own wagon and set off toward her ranch. Douglas helped Victoria down from their wagon and suddenly felt awkward again. This was their wedding night. He had been alone for so long that the thought of sharing space, sharing a bed, with another person felt overwhelming. "I should check on Mama," Victoria said, and he could hear the same nervousness in her voice. "Of course. I will tend to the horses." He took longer than necessary putting away the wagon and settling the horses, giving Victoria time with her mother. When he finally entered the cabin, Eleanor's door was closed and Victoria was moving around the main room, clearly trying to keep busy. "Mama is tired but happy for us. She sends her love and congratulations." Victoria smoothed her hands down her dress. "I thought I might make us some tea, Victoria." Douglas crossed to her and took her hands gently. "We do not have to do anything tonight except sleep if that is what you want. I know this is all very sudden and strange. We are married, yes, but we barely know each other. We can take time to get comfortable with each other." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. I do want to be a proper wife to you, Douglas. I want us to have a real marriage. But I am so tired and so nervous, and I think I might disappoint you if we rush things." "Then we will not rush. We have time, all the time in the world. Let me show you something." He led her to the bed behind the curtain, and she could see he had made changes. The bed was made up with fresh linens, and he had rigged a second curtain that divided the sleeping area in half. "I thought tonight we could sleep separately, but close by. That way we are both comfortable but still sharing the space as husband and wife. Tomorrow or the next day or whenever you are ready, we can remove the dividing curtain." Victoria threw her arms around him impulsively, and he caught her with surprise. "You are so kind. I do not know what I did to deserve you. You answered my advertisement. That was brave enough." He hugged her back, feeling the slightness of her frame against him. "We are partners now, Victoria. We will figure all of this out together, at whatever pace feels right for both of us." That night, they slept separated by only a thin curtain, and Douglas found comfort in the sound of her breathing, the small movements as she settled into sleep. For the first time in 6 years, he did not feel alone in his own home. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Victoria proved to be everything she had promised, a capable and hard-working partner. She transformed the cabin with small touches, cleaning and organizing, sewing new curtains and table linens from fabric Douglas bought on a trip to town. She kept a garden near the house, growing vegetables and herbs that enhanced their meals. She learned to make butter and cheese from the cow's milk, to smoke meat in the smokehouse, to preserve vegetables for the winter ahead. Eleanor improved steadily in the mountain air. Her cough lessened, her appetite returned, and color came back to her cheeks. She could not do heavy work, but she kept busy mending clothes, teaching Victoria recipes from her own mother, sitting on the porch in the afternoons watching the ranch operations with interest. Douglas taught Victoria to ride so she could get around the ranch more easily. She proved a natural horsewoman, fearless and graceful in the saddle. Together, they would ride out to check on the cattle, to repair fences, to simply explore the land that was now theirs together. On these rides they talked, really talked, learning each other's histories and dreams. 3 weeks after the wedding, Victoria removed the dividing curtain between their sleeping areas without fanfare. That night, Douglas held her as they fell asleep, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Their physical relationship developed slowly, carefully, with tenderness and patience on both sides. Douglas had been with women before, but never with this feeling of partnership and growing affection. Victoria came to the marriage bed inexperienced but willing to learn, and he took care to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Summer faded into autumn, and the ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Douglas was able to expand his herd by 50 head, buying young steers at a good price from a neighboring rancher. Victoria's garden produced more than they could eat, and she spent long days preserving and pickling, filling the pantry with jars of food for winter. In October, a letter arrived from Victoria's sister Mary. Their aunt had died suddenly, leaving Mary without home or income. Could she possibly come west? Victoria brought the letter to Douglas with shaking hands, and he read it quickly. Write back immediately and tell her to come. Send her money for the train if she needs it. He pulled Victoria close as she started to cry with relief. She is your sister. Of course she will come here. Mary arrived 3 weeks later, a pretty blonde girl who looked nothing like her dark-haired sister. She was thin from poor food and hard work, but she had Victoria's same determined chin and quick intelligence. Douglas met her at the station in St. Elmo and brought her back to the ranch, where Victoria swept her into a fierce embrace. "You are safe now," Victoria said over and over. "You are home." Mary fit into ranch life with surprising ease. She shared the loft with good humor, declaring it a palace compared to the boarding house she had shared with 6 other girls in Philadelphia. She proved handy with the horses and fearless with the cattle, though Douglas made sure she understood the dangers and never let her work alone until she was properly trained. Winter came hard and fast that year, with snow falling heavy in November and temperatures dropping below zero. But the cabin was warm and tight, the pantry was full, and Douglas had laid in plenty of firewood. Eleanor's health held steady through the cold months, and the 4 of them would sit around the table in the evenings playing cards or reading aloud from the few books Douglas owned. It was during one of these evenings in late January that Victoria told him she was expecting a baby. She waited until they were alone in their sleeping area, her hands nervously twisting in her nightgown. "I am almost certain. I have missed 2 courses and I feel different. Tired all the time, and certain smells make me feel ill." Douglas pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with emotion he could not quite name. Joy, certainly, but also fear for her safety, for the baby's safety. "How do you feel about it? Are you happy?" "Terrified and happy in equal measure. I always wanted children, but I never thought I would have the chance after Father died and Mama got sick. But Douglas, I do not know anything about babies. What if I am a terrible mother? You will be wonderful. Look how you care for your mother and sister. Look how you have made this place a home. You will be an amazing mother." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." The news spread through their little household with appropriate excitement. Eleanor cried with joy at the thought of a grandchild. Mary immediately began sewing tiny clothes and blankets, and Douglas found himself walking around in a daze, still trying to absorb the magnitude of becoming a father. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived it brought an explosion of new life. Calves were born in the fields, colts wobbled on new legs in the barn, and Victoria's belly swelled with their child. Douglas hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased work, 2 brothers named Jack and Tom who proved honest and capable. With their help, he was able to stay closer to home as Victoria's time approached. In early June, almost exactly a year after Victoria had arrived in St. Elmo, she went into labor. Douglas sent Tom racing for the doctor in town while he and Eleanor and Mary did their best to keep Victoria comfortable. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Douglas held Victoria's hand through the worst of it, feeling helpless and terrified as she suffered. But finally, as afternoon sun slanted through the windows, a baby's cry pierced the air. "A boy," Eleanor announced, tears streaming down her face. "You have a son, Douglas." They named him Daniel after Douglas's father, and from the moment Douglas held his son for the first time, he understood a kind of love he had never known existed. The baby was small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same green as his mother's. Victoria recovered slowly from the birth, and Douglas found himself taking on more of the household work in addition to the ranch duties. Mary proved invaluable during this time, caring for the baby when Victoria needed to rest, keeping the house running smoothly. Eleanor, though still not strong, could hold the baby and rock him to sleep, and the joy in her face made her look years younger. Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. Daniel was a good child, not overly fussy, and Douglas found he loved the midnight feedings when he would sit in the rocking chair he had built, his son in his arms, the cabin quiet around them. These were the moments when he marveled at how completely his life had changed in just over a year. One evening in late summer, as they all sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Eleanor turned to Douglas with tears in her eyes. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to truly hear me." "What is it, Eleanor? Are you not feeling well?" "I am feeling wonderful. That is what I need to tell you. When I left Philadelphia, the doctors gave me 6 months, maybe a year at most. That was 15 months ago, Douglas." 15 months. I have lived to see my grandson born, to see my daughters happy and safe. The air here, the peace, the life you have given us, it has given me time I never thought I would have. "You will have many more years yet," Victoria said fiercely, reaching for her mother's hand. "Perhaps. Perhaps not. But either way, I have been blessed beyond measure, and it is because of you, Douglas. Because you saw 2 desperate women on a train platform and decided to be kind instead of practical." Eleanor stood and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for giving me this time, for giving me this family. Whatever happens from here, I am at peace." The years rolled forward with the same mix of joy and hardship that defined life in the Colorado mountains. Eleanor's health continued to hold, defying all the doctors' predictions. She would never be truly strong again, but she managed her condition and made the most of every day she was given. Mary thrived on the ranch, growing from a thin, worn-down girl into a confident young woman. When she was 19, she caught the eye of Tom, one of the ranch hands, and after a proper courtship, they married in the same small church where Douglas and Victoria had wed. Douglas built them a small cabin on the southern edge of his property, and Tom became his foreman, managing the day-to-day operations with skill and dedication. Victoria gave birth to 2 more children over the following years, a daughter they named Violet when Daniel was 3, and another son they named David when Violet was 2. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family, with Douglas adding another room and eventually a second floor. What had started as a simple bachelor's cabin became a sprawling family home, filled with the noise and chaos and joy of children. The ranch prospered under Douglas and Tom's management. They expanded the herd to over 1,000 head, bought more land, built a proper bunkhouse for the additional hands they hired during busy seasons. Victoria's practical management of the household finances meant they saved steadily, building security against the hard times that inevitably came with ranching. Daniel grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch life, following his father everywhere and learning the business from the ground up. Violet proved to be a hellion on horseback, fearless and wild, keeping everyone on their toes. David was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a gift for understanding animals that sometimes seemed almost magical. On a crisp October evening in 1893, exactly 10 years after Victoria had first arrived in St. Elmo, the family gathered for supper around the expanded table. Douglas looked around at the faces lit by lamplight, at his wife who still made his heart skip when she smiled at him, at his children arguing cheerfully over who got the last biscuit, at Eleanor who was now 72 years old and still going strong despite all predictions, at Mary and Tom who had given them twin nephews the previous spring. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria asked softly, catching his eye. "Just that I am the luckiest man alive," he said honestly. 10 years ago I was eating supper alone in this cabin, talking to myself or my horse. Now look at this. Look at what we have built." "We built it together," Victoria corrected. "I seem to remember someone telling me once that we were partners, that we would figure everything out together. And were they right? They were absolutely right." She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers warm and familiar in his. "I love you, Douglas Lancaster. I think I have loved you since the day I stepped off that stagecoach and you could have sent me away but chose kindness instead. I love you too, and I would make the same choice every single time." He raised his voice slightly to include everyone at the table. "I think we should make a toast to family, to second chances, and to unexpected blessings that change everything." They raised their glasses, even the children with their milk, and echoed his words. To family. Outside the windows, the Colorado mountains stood eternal against the darkening sky. The ranch spread out around them, thousands of acres of grassland and cattle, testament to years of hard work and partnership. Inside the warm cabin, the family Douglas had built through an act of faith and kindness continued their meal, their conversation, their life together. Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed and Eleanor and Mary had retired to their rooms, Douglas and Victoria stood on the porch looking up at the stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "Do you ever think about that day you arrived?" he asked. "Wonder what would have happened if I had reacted differently?" "Sometimes. And then I stop thinking about it because it does not matter. What matters is what you did do, how you chose to handle an unexpected situation with grace and kindness." She turned in his arms to face him. "You know what I think about more often? I think about that first night when you immediately started building Mama a room. That was when I knew everything would be all right. That was when I started to believe in us. I just did what needed to be done. No, you did what a good man does. You saw a need and filled it without hesitation or complaint. You made us family before we were even married, before you had any obligation to us at all." She kissed him softly. "That is who you are, Douglas. That is why this all worked, why we built something beautiful together." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped in each other's arms. Inside the house, they could hear the muffled sounds of their children settling into sleep, the creak of floorboards as Eleanor moved around her room, the distant laughter of Mary and Tom heading back to their cabin. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life well lived. "Come to bed," Victoria said finally. "Tomorrow will be another long day and we need our rest. One more minute. I just want to stand here with you and appreciate all of this. All right, one more minute." She smiled up at him, her face soft in the starlight, "But only because I love you. And I love you. More than I ever thought possible." They stayed on the porch watching the stars wheel overhead, two people who had found each other through unlikely circumstances and built something lasting. Behind them, the cabin stood solid and warm, expanded from its humble origins into a true home. Around them, the ranch spread out in all directions, the fruits of their combined labor and dedication. The years continued to pass with the same steady rhythm. Eleanor lived to see her great-grandchildren, holding Daniel's first baby when she was 78 years old. She passed peacefully in her sleep one winter night, surrounded by the family that had been her salvation. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, where she could eternally watch over the land and people she had grown to love. Mary and Tom had 5 children total, and the partnership between Douglas and Tom made the ranch one of the most successful in the region. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, survived market crashes and disease outbreaks, always pulling together as a family to overcome whatever challenges arose. Victoria's beauty matured with age, the girl who had stepped off the stagecoach becoming a woman of grace and strength. She managed the complex household with skill, mothered her children and helped with her grandchildren, and remained Douglas's most trusted advisor in all matters of the ranch. Their love, which had started as mutual respect and careful partnership, had deepened into something unshakable. Daniel took over much of the ranch management as Douglas entered his 50s, showing the same practical wisdom and fairness that his father had always demonstrated. Violet married a veterinarian and moved to Denver but visited often with her own growing family. David stayed on the ranch, developing a breeding program for horses that became renowned throughout Colorado. On their 20th anniversary, Douglas surprised Victoria with a trip to Denver, their first real vacation in all their years together. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, went to the theater. But after 3 days, Victoria was ready to go home. "I miss the ranch," she admitted as they sat in their hotel room. "I miss the children and the sounds of the cattle and waking up to see the mountains out our window." "Is that silly?" "Not at all. I was thinking the same thing." Douglas pulled her close. "We have built a good life, have we not? The best life. Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was working in that textile mill, wondering if I would ever have anything more than exhaustion and worry." She looked up at him with eyes that still sparkled with intelligence and humor. "Do you ever regret answering that advertisement, taking on a bride who came with unexpected complications?" "Never. Not for one single moment." He meant it with every fiber of his being. "You and Eleanor and Mary, you are the best things that ever happened to me. You made me into more than I was, gave me purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me family, Victoria. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," she corrected. "That first night when you could have been angry or felt deceived, you chose kindness instead. You built that room for Mama, and in doing so, you built the foundation for all of this. Everything we have now started with that choice." They went home the next day, and Victoria cried with happiness when they crested the rise and saw the ranch spread out below them. The cabin had been expanded so many times it was barely recognizable as the simple structure Douglas had built years ago. Barns and outbuildings dotted the landscape. Cattle grazed peacefully in every direction. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren ran to greet them as they pulled up to the house. "Welcome home," Daniel called out, helping his mother down from the wagon. "We missed you." "We missed you too," Victoria said, hugging each child and grandchild in turn. "Although it was lovely to have a few quiet days with your father." The years rolled on as years do. Douglas's hair went white, and his back grew stiff from decades of hard work, but he still rode out most mornings to check on the herd. Victoria's hands became gnarled with arthritis, but she still insisted on helping with the cooking and sewing, teaching her granddaughters the skills her own mother had taught her. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, surrounded by 3 generations of family. Their 40th anniversary was marked with a party that brought in neighbors from miles around. By their 50th anniversary, they were the oldest married couple in the region, revered for their enduring love and the empire they had built together. On a summer evening in 1934, when Douglas was 81 and Victoria was 74, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. Douglas's health was failing, and they both knew his time was growing short. But there was peace between them, the peace of a life well lived and love well shared. "Remember that first night?" Victoria asked, her voice still strong despite her age. "When you built that room for Mama, how could I forget? I think that was when I started falling in love with you, watching you care for your mother with such devotion." He squeezed her hand gently. "Best decision I ever made, starting that room right away instead of waiting. It set the tone for everything that followed. You showed me who you were in that moment, Douglas. A man of action and integrity, someone who saw what needed to be done and did it without hesitation." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I have been so blessed to share my life with you. The blessing was all mine. I was just a lonely rancher with an empty cabin. You filled it with love and life and purpose. You gave me everything I did not even know I was missing." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains they had called home for more than half a century. Around them, the ranch hummed with activity as their children and grandchildren went about their evening routines. Inside the house, great-grandchildren played and squabbled and laughed, carrying on the legacy of family that had started with two strangers meeting on a train platform. Douglas passed peacefully in his sleep a week later, with Victoria holding his hand and their children gathered around. They buried him next to Eleanor on the hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved and nurtured for so long. Victoria lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by family but always missing her partner. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren about the grandfather they were too young to remember well, keeping his memory alive through her words. She taught them about kindness and partnership, about taking chances on love and being open to unexpected blessings. When her own time came, she went peacefully, secure in the knowledge that the family she and Douglas had built would continue for generations. They laid her to rest beside her husband, reuniting them in death as they had been united in life. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren. The story of how it all began became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The tale of a mail-order bride who brought her elderly mother, and the rancher who built a room that very night, building not just shelter but the foundation of enduring love and family. The cabin where it all started was eventually preserved as a family museum, expanded and renovated but maintaining the original room Douglas had built that first night. Visitors could stand in that space and imagine the young rancher working by lantern light, building not just walls but a future. They could picture Victoria watching from the porch, starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. Because of one act of kindness on a summer evening in 1883, because a lonely rancher chose compassion over convenience, an entire legacy was born. Douglas and Victoria Lancaster became more than just husband and wife. They became the foundation of something lasting, proof that love built on mutual respect, hard work, and partnership could weather any storm. Their story became a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of family, and the magic that can happen when two people commit to building something beautiful together. It all started with an unexpected arrival, a difficult situation, and a choice to embrace the challenge rather than turn it away. From that choice, everything else followed. A love story that lasted 51 years and created ripples that would extend for generations to come. The mountains still stood watch over the ranch, eternal and unchanging. But the land below had been transformed by the love and labor of two people who had found each other through chance and chosen each other through devotion. Their legacy lived on in every fence post and barn, in every child that bore their names, in every story told about the mail-order bride who brought her elderly mother, and the rancher who built a second room that very night. building not just a shelter but a home, not just a marriage but a love that would echo through the ages.